Welcome to Inspire, the Angel Flores podcast, where you'll be inspired, equipped, and entertained. This podcast is sponsored by Mosaic Church, a church for people who don't really like church. To learn more about Mosaic, please visit our website at greeleymosaic.com.
Okay, Elias, thank you for coming on. Thank you for agreeing to do this. We have known each other. I just figured it out the other day. 16 years, man, a little over 16 years. We met. I hired you to be a teacher at an online high school. So that's how we first met and have just become, I consider you a very close friend. It's been a heck of a ride. So let's start out with your story. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? A little bit of family life, that stuff.
Awesome. Well, it's truly an honor to be here. And I want to commend you for making this happen and creating a platform for so many of us to reach a community that we all care and love for. So that's cool. True talk. Right and then congratulations on the big 33 anniversary. So props to you. 33. And you're right, man. We had an awesome encounter in our first, when we first met, and just some amazing memories since then. And it's been quite a bit of journey. What'd you say, 15 years?
16.
16 years.
Yep.
It's been an awesome ride, man. I've been very fortunate and to be a part of that. So that said, and I think largely one of the things that made that journey so special is I think a lot of our shared common identities and our upbringings and our culture and family and all of those wonderful things.
Yeah, we both at the time rode motorcycles, Latinos, of course. Into MMA.
Right.
Both love MMA.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of us practices jiu-jitsu now. One doesn't. But anyway.
It's one's natural and then the other one is like technical. I think
one of us needed to learn and one already knew it. All right. So let's go with born and raised.
Born and raised. So born and raised, I was born in West Texas, Slayton, Texas by Post. Lived there 11 years, moved here to Greeley.
How big is Post?
People who've never been there. Yeah, that's a great question. I hate to throw a number out because then it's going to be way off. But I think if we were to put it in perspective, it had a courthouse, has a very big cemetery. So
kind of a small West Texas, Texas Panhandle almost, right?
Yeah,
kind of up north.
Yeah. The highway runs through it, but it's definitely a small place. But a lot of family history there, and
how'd your family end up there? Do you know?
Yeah, the cotton mill. So my parents were from the San Antonio area, and we'd always been involved in agriculture back in that time in regards to, providing workers for that was my grandparents. So they were transporting workers to farms and
so
traveling.
Migrant workers,
yep. Exactly. And then, which is interesting in regards to migration and all that, and all that thing, because back in the 50s, that's what we were doing. That's how we come to discover Greeley. But Post happened to have a cotton mill or cotton gin, and that created all kinds of sustainability. So that rooted people, and that created like a big time job for many of the locals. So my parents moved there specifically for that.
And then people just stayed there. Then they quit with the migrating and the. Okay.
Exactly, except the mill stopped, the cotton mill stopped, and the oil field built up, and then that's where that community ended up. A majority of the community.
They found work in the oil field.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So talk about your family a little bit, because you have a little bit of a non-traditional.
Absolutely. I think some things that I'd love for people to know that may not know. So at 8 years old, I did lose my mom. I was the youngest of 7. So if, the birth order connection, all that stuff, recognizing what being the last born is and all that.
The baby of the family.
Those are all the things that I was. So I had, I have 5. I have a lot of brothers. And
you have a big family when you're like, how many?
Right.
There's a bunch.
There was 7 of us
originally. We went
originally.
to a buffet. They kicked us out.
We took a whole banquet room. Yeah. So there was.
So your mom dies when
I was
you're
the youngest
8.
of 7. Yeah. So she died when I was 8 in our home, and And I remember, being in the room and discovering that. And so that was a game changer for me.
Was she sick?
To the medical field, sure, but to us, I didn't really see it.
Yeah.
She was a bigger woman, and yeah. So I think till this day, I don't even know what the
cause of
reasons
death
were.
or,
I just know that she was, in her mid-40s when it happened, and so that was a rocked our world, really. And
so now you have single dad with 7 kids.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
And he remarried, my stepmother, and they had one. And so, and my stepmother had 4 who are now, my brothers and sisters, and I'm very grateful for the upbringing. Because it was tough. It was a tough time, and it was crazy. And again, an 8-year-old
that's
kid.
That's Mexican Brady Bunch right there.
Right,
man.
right.
So 12 total.
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah.
And the impact on someone, the impact, at least on me, I can really speak for myself on this space, but I was in 3rd grade, 4th, maybe something like that. And I failed 3rd grade. I mean, there was just, it was really kind of just a crazy, experience, with any 8-year-old that kind of, and then figuring out, well, what's this new family? And there's a lot of things that happen, from that. So, that impacted our journey and impacted our experience. But I mean, 2 years after that, so that was in 84 and 86, my father got injured in the oil field and burned 75% of his body. It was like 3rd-degree burns.
Wow.
So he was in ICU. We weren't even sure he was going to live. So that was 2 years before that. Sorry. He was in 84 and my numbers are all messed up. I can't remember.
So your dad?
2 years before my mom passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he was disabled?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was another reason why we moved to Greeley.
Okay.
Was this accident. And all of these things that were happening, I wasn't recognizing what I think I see clearer now. And that was the poor working conditions, the fact that what my mom had was preventative and, and how healthcare and how, I'm a bit jaded, if I was honest, in regards to the working conditions of the oil fields in those areas.
In the 80s for sure, yeah.
I mean,
almost like an expendable workforce.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's so many folks that need work. Working conditions are, OSHA probably wasn't then what it is now for sure. So yeah, wow.
I mean, I got cousins and families and uncles that were impacted. I mean, paralyzed and, losing a member. I mean, and my father, who's never the same again since. Right. So it was devastating, really.
So you guys come to Greeley.
As low income, welfare, all of that. So that was 9 of us. We're in Greeley, 1-bedroom apartment off of Highway 85 there in Evans.
Holy smokes, yeah.
Crazy. And yet the one common thing that we did have from there was Church of God of Prophecy, which was,
So you guys were in church in Texas and came and found the local.
From a kid.
Denomination here in Greeley. Just jumped right in, I imagine.
And the unique thing about this was, as Latinos and, from Texas, is my parents and my grandparents were all the Pentecostal, kind of ideology at that space, and it remained. So it was. I mean, I know that we can talk about a lot of things for a long periods of time, but that concept of Latinos that are not Catholic or that are now doing a Christian Pentecostal vibe, and now we're even that now as I'm later on in life, as I'm reflecting on the many cultures and the dynamics of that, but I'm almost honored to have had that experience so early on. And
so you had no Catholic experience at all?
Never.
Interesting, yeah. Because that's kind of the national religion of Hispanic people, right? Or Mexican, right? It's like you're by default almost Catholic.
I think sometimes when someone would perceive a religion of a Latino,
they would assume
Mexicano, it would be like, oh, well, you're Catholic. And not to generalize, but
right. I mean, generally speaking, that's kind of how people look at African Americans, right? A lot of Baptists, a lot of that Southern Baptist kind of vibe. So yeah, interesting that you didn't have that. Yeah.
And that was part of my ideology and this transition or journey, right? And when we're talking about how was I raised was, we've often talked about, well, identity as a Mexicano, Latino, Chicano, but, so my faith was a strong identity of who we were. And then, being Chicano, which again, my parents knew English and I had to learn Spanish. So, discovering that, it's been an awesome journey. Our connection to agriculture, this idea of being poor or living in a lower income bracket for sure.
Yeah.
But yet being a second, third generation Mexican-American was, is figuring out, right?
It's hard to, you can't generalize a guy like you because there's so many nuance, so much nuance in your identity and who you are. So growing up, low income apartments, what was that like?
So actually that was when we made it, man. To be to get into the low income apartments is when we made it, because you got to remember we were in a 1-bedroom apartment, 9 of us.
Son of a gun.
And that was miserable. Well, I mean, for us as kids, we really didn't know, right? But so when we got into the Dominique apartments, I mean, I know our community, is well aware of, how special the Dominiques or the Deltas are. They serve many families, and But this was the first time ever that we got into a 4-bedroom, apartment.
Yeah.
I mean, upstairs we had 2 bathrooms. I mean, we were living large. The back was like this open green field that was always green, and it was just like they had a court of a basketball court for us. We hit the lotto.
Yeah.
And yet, except it was, and then the awesome thing was that, all my friends and all our community within that, and which you do have a community, we were all going to school together. So we all knew that was where it wasn't until
was
later.
Boys and Girls Club there already?
They were there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Was that part of your?
No, it was a little bit later. I went to the old Boys and Girls Club back in. And because they had a bus that picked us up. So that was another very special thing.
Yeah.
Because I was a pool player. Pool player back in the day.
I would love to test that today. Where'd you go to high school?
Greeley West. But prior to that, I went to many elementaries, not elementaries, middle schools. So Chapello, Franklin, Heath. We were jumping from place to place, from trailer house to trailer house. And at one point.
So when you guys would move across town, you're switching schools, whatever's closest.
Yeah, and I can't really recall why there was so much moving, because really when I'm thinking about my upbringing, most of it, I recall it in the Dominic apartments. Yeah.
Interesting. How old were you when you moved there?
In the Dominic apartments. So I think I was 12 when I remember celebrating my 12th birthday in that 1-bedroom apartment in Evans.
Okay.
So it was shortly after that.
All right. Yeah. So 12, 13 years old.
Something like that, yeah.
And all through high school?
All through high school, yeah. Right. Yeah, through, so because I failed 3rd grade, I was 18 and still a senior, but that allowed me to work full time. And that's where EFTC comes into the picture, which is chapter 2 of that, Electronic Fab Technology Corporation. But
that was a big employer back in the day in Greeley. Now they're gone, but
and it was a good one.
What kind of student were you? Because we're going to talk about your academics and all that a little bit later. But in high school, what kind of student were you?
A knucklehead, and I just didn't try, and I didn't have the skill sets to really learn what I didn't have the study habits, and I never did. But that, and from my lens, wasn't abnormal.
Right.
I think what was a value in my home was work. As a Latino male, you work, and the other one was, hey, have faith. That was important. Yeah. So I felt I was a great kid, a good kid.
We're checking the boxes,
But yet I was never challenged to, academically, or I wasn't asked to do my homework at home or any of that stuff. So I was always just making the cut. I mean,
just scraping by.
Scraping by. And you got to remember that our school system's, again, something that I didn't value or I didn't understand at the time. I thought it was just the norm to have so many in the classrooms, to have, so many Latinos or so many issues or so many things. But I think there's so many great stories about coming from Post-Texas, which is a very rigid, very strict, very, strong conservative school where they still, gave licks, which is a paddle with a wooden paddle, for getting. So when I transferred here, when we came here, my world was rocked. I'm like, what is going on here, man? It was crazy. I've never been in school so large. So there was all kinds of cultural shock. And, but what came of that was I hate to admit at that time, there was really not that much solid support from District 6 at that time with Latino students. And not that I'm trying to put blame on it, but it didn't help. It didn't help a student that was already just trying to go day to day just because
just get
that's
by.
How you are. Yeah. If you graduated, great. When I think of my family, handful of us graduated high school. So, I mean, that would have been a huge accomplishment. Graduate high school and get a good job.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just got a good job somewhere, making good money.
Right.
You did it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And never go to school again.
Yeah.
So and I'd seen a few examples of that in my home. So it wasn't like I was still a good person.
Right. Yeah.
I went to church. I got a good job, and a decent guy. So that was
so then graduate, get a job, start your life. What got you on the road to go back to school?
I knew what I didn't want. At this point, I'm recognizing that, look, my family, I remember the jobs that I had, whether it be in LaSalle working the pickle dock. There's Millard's right there off of, the same street as I'd work there, with livers and spleens and all that, and working third shift. So I'm doing all that as soon as I'm eligible to do it.
Just trying to get traction in life, trying to figure it out. Yeah.
And I was doing, so much hard labor. Mm-hmm. And I seen around, I was like, I want more. I want more. So that was my first interest. And then again, at that time, my faith was really, it was founded. So changing people and impacting people was a thing. So my first run at college was in elementary education, which I don't ever share that too often, but it's because it was a pretty quick run. And
how long were you there?
I was there for 1 semester before they kicked me out.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't invite me back. And it had to do with 15 W's.
15 withdrawals?
15 credit withdrawals, yeah.
Where were you? Ames? Or UNC?
No, I was at UNC. Yeah,
UNC.
I somehow made it into UNC. And but check this out. So at that point, I was 18. I was still in high school. No, I was just in high school. I had moved out because at 18, and if you're working, you they increase the rent at a low income housing.
Oh.
So I didn't want to do that to my parents. Mm-hmm. So I talked to my buddy. He says, you can rent my basement for $250. We do that. And so I'm going to high school. And then at 2:45, I'm clocking in at EFTC. And then I'm getting out at 11. Well, then I graduate, right? And and I got into UNC. I'm still on that working at EFTC and then going to school in the day. But I had no idea. I just knew that, okay, this is what people do. I remember going to my first psych class and it being 100 people and I'm like lost. So and then I remember at work saying, hey, we got to work overtime. So you're going from 11 to now 2 in the morning and then still trying to get to work. All of these things that felt normal to me. Yeah, to a university without having the resources, without being connected with people, without doing anything. So, and I got a crappy car because that's a whole nother, chapters of how we get into crappy cars. All of these things for someone to have found me, discovered me, and said, Elias, what are you doing? You're doing this all wrong. How in the world are you going to work a full-time job? How are you going to work a car that's going to leave you stranded, half the time? And then a job that you're prioritizing over anything. You're never going to make it. You're not connecting in college. You're not connecting with counselors, advisors. I didn't know anything about financial aid. None of that. So it was inevitable.
Right.
Inevitable what was going to happen.
If you were designing a path for someone to flame out in college, that would have been it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. No support at all.
Exactly.
No role models. Nobody to look at. Right. You were just flying blind. Just trying to figure it out. Just seemed like a good thing. Yeah. So 1 semester and done.
Yeah.
Go Bears.
And so then imagine what that does to someone, right? Imagine what that does to someone who already had the imposter syndrome and they're saying, I never belonged here anyway. Especially when you look around and you're like, I don't have a community.
Where's the Hispanic kids?
Exactly. Right, I wasn't living on campus. So there was that error. I was going back to home, and actually I remember my brother saying, hey, you can come live with us in LaSalle in a 2-bedroom apartment, and he's got 2 kids, and him like, well, at least you don't have to pay rent. And I'm like, well, that was a huge thing. So there was that kind of support. but it still didn't make up for
Right, yeah.
me not understanding the priority of education.
So then what'd you do?
I failed, and then I was humbled, and then EFTC shut down, and then I'm like,
Dang it.
well, what the heck? And I always knew hard work. I always knew that. I mean, again, I could tell you time and time again about how, how I could find jobs. When we got
Right.
here, we were working the fields, and we were doing stuff like that. I was working, just so many outside areas because Latino hard work, whatever.
Right. Labor.
So, right. Labor is one of the things that we always found.
Right.
And it was interesting how in our family, if one brother-in-law got a good job working over here,
get everybody else
everybody
on,
was
yeah.
there, right? That's how the LaSalle Pickle Doc came about. And then I was making good money, all that stuff. But anyway, after that, EFTC closed. I had a buddy that I was doing some floor work. So I became a self-contractor and learned to do floors and tile and all that good stuff. And that was a couple of years that I thought was like, holy smokes, I'm making good money. And that was an interesting time and a fun time, but it was still laborious. But that was the first time ever that I had a glimpse of what it was to be an entrepreneur and making your own money. And that was the first time that I ever got a good car. And that was only because my boss, who he was also a subcontractor to Dell's, he co-signed for me. He had a lot better credit than I had at that time. And he's like, Elias, we're going to a car lot and we're going to pick out and I got a Nissan 4Runner, man. And it was...
You were the man.
I was the man. That was the first time ever, man, that I got a good car because of his credit.
I think there's probably... we have a lot of young leaders that listen to this podcast and watch us on YouTube and all that. And I think a lot of them, especially guys who are a first generation professional, student, entrepreneur, right? They're trying to figure it out. Church planter, pastor, whatever. They've never had it modeled. So they're just trying to figure it out. I think a lot of them will relate to your story of like, it's almost like bumping around in the dark and you knock something over and you break it and you stub your toe. You're just trying to figure it out without anybody guiding you, right? So then how'd you meet your wife?
Well, if I can also touch on because of the work piece, and this was, so after a while, I went to work for R.R. Donnelly, and I mentioned that because I know for our community here in Weld County, EFTC means something, and that's a form and style of Electronic Fab Technology Corporation,
soldering and
circuit boards, all that, and it's like, it's a good job. You got a smock. You're like, it's a clean. It's like
it's not outside.
It's not outside. It's
no heavy lifting.
Tech and everybody that's that you tell there that you're working in. It's like it sounds cool. So I prioritized that, and I was making $9 an hour, right? But then, so I did my contracting work, and then R. Donnelly opened up. And those that know, I got to meet some wonderful people, from our community, Mosaic community, originally from like R. Donnelly. And that was my glimpse of like a good job. That was a bit of both worlds, right? It was working because at that time they were running printing presses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And during the busy ones.
R. Donnelly used to print phone books.
Yes.
So you can probably guess where that's going to end up. But back in the day, they were a huge employer. I mean, phone books were the way you figured. It was a different world without the internet.
Yeah.
And so phone books were crucial. They were a necessity, and they would print them for, other countries, right? Like they were going all over the world, United States and whatever. So anyway,
And the printing presses, again, we're 3 stories high. They were running papers, 2 rows of like 5-foot paper, 2,600 square feet per minute. We were getting our own uniforms, but we were all linked up. And because you're working so much with you develop a community, and you also develop some very big checks. And that was something that I resonated with, right? Hard work equals good pay, good and money, then you have a community there. But 1, it wasn't going to last forever, and 2, I knew I still wanted more. So while I was in R. Donnelly, and years after I had failed out of college, I decided I'm going back to Ames, and I was
community college,
Yep, and I was doing criminal justice because I was like, I'm going to save the lost, right? I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the world in that way. And I did about 18 to 20 credits in community college. Yeah. So, and then Laura, you want to go into that one?
Yeah, whatever, yeah.
Sure.
So you're working at R. Donnelly, making good money, going to school again, trying to figure that piece out.
Right.
And then you meet the one.
It was during that time that, so I was 23 and, in our faith, we were like, and especially when those of us that have been brought up in the church and stuff, there's a term when you stop coming to church, and at that time, they considered it, oh, you backslid, and and so there was that stage too. Where
so it's a very there's a certain legalistic side to Pentecostalism, and there's a very you're either in or you're out kind of vibe, and so kind of a smaller church community, right? So becomes a family. So you're in that. Right. So it's like you got to find a girl from inside the tribe, man. You can't just dating anybody. You got to find a Pentecostal Church of God girl, right? That was kind of the idea.
Well, in this journey, you got to remember that at 18, when I'm on my own, I'm doing all this independent stuff. I'm trying to discover life. There's I had stepped out of the church. So I had already at 18. I was like, I thought, well, I'm free. Yeah. And I'm also backslid, so there's some liberty there, but there's also a lot of guilt. And but I wasn't at home anymore. So I did spend a lot of time. I would say at least 5 years. I was 23 when I discovered, like, okay, I went and had my fun, and went crazy, to be honest.
Sowed the wild oats.
And I was really much just pretty much assimilating.
All of it.
Oh, that was a little bit during that time.
We'll post a picture of that.
Yes. That was largely the Chemo Leopoldo, man, which we all know how influential he was in the early 90s.
Chemo was an early, one of the early UFC fighters. But he was cool, man, because describe Chemo.
You tell me, You tell me.
I mean, he would come out to fight carrying a cross, wearing like a monk's robe. But he was this huge Chicano, tattered up and just ripped. I met him. I'll post this picture for sure. I met him at an outdoor mall in Irvine, California. And I saw him walking, and I just yelled across the mall, Chemo! And he looked at me, and it scared me. But I ended up meeting him, praying with him. Super nice guy. Anyway, Chemo, he was a man.
I mentioned that.
Big shout out to Chemo Leopoldo.
Big shout out to Chemo. If I could meet you, yes. So he had Jesus tattooed on his back. He had the crucifix, on his chest.
On his stomach,
He was bench pressing like 600 pounds, some crazy. And,
First guy to ever stop a Gracie.
Hoist Gracie, right?
Yep.
And so he had this ponytail. And
now he didn't, Hoist beat him. I don't want to get a bunch of comments. Hoist beat him, but Hoist could not continue in the tournament because of the beating that Chemo gave him.
Right.
So.
And, the reason I even bring him up is because who he was and what he was doing at the time was so taboo. Here he is a Christian. He was, wanting to, he's seen it as a ministry to be fighting MMA, which was
trying to reach people through this.
It was
at the time human cockfighting. Right. It was like
unheard of.
I remember John McCain calling it human cockfighting.
Oh, absolutely.
And they outlawed it in New York, and
only doing it in reservations because there were only so many places, and it was going to go down until it got picked up later, right? But how that resonated with my soul was that's kind of what I was going through. I really wanted this intentions and this foundational core in me, but I also seen myself as developing into a man and trying to figure out what is that world, which took me into I would say even an unhealthy relationship of what women were, or my dating or all that during that time. Until I decided I returned to the church, and at 23, and then oftentimes again, just as polarized as it is to backslide, and when you recommit at that time, it was I'm going all in, because in our mindset it was you're either all in or you're all out.
Right.
So I started doing the licensure for the ministry, became a lay minister, started doing youth ministry. And when I think back of some of the highest moments, those moments, which were again by the Sunrise Clinic, our church right there, and
east side of town.
East side of town. And working with those students and connecting with students and making a difference in my community, which now it's all, those are all, when you're looking at it politically, or when you're looking at it even through an educational lens, that's like everything, right? Community outreach. At that point, it was just me doing what I loved, and we were a powerhouse. I was decent at it, so I did that for 6 years. But after 3 years, I was promoted to a state youth director. So then I was doing I was overseeing 14 churches. So now leadership was like intense. So now I was reading books by John Maxwell. I was collecting, I was working, actually, Ben's wife. I'm going to throw a little shout out to Angela. She was my supervisor at the Christian bookstore because I wanted to work at a Christian bookstore because I knew I can get discounts. Until this day, I got these great big pictures because of the discounts that Angela allowed me to have, because it's,
I never knew Angela was your boss.
She was, yeah. Shortly after I got fired, but not by her.
We'll have Angela on to tell that story. There's two sides to every story.
Yeah. So I made this commitment to God when I was done. I was done dating. I was in an unhealthy relationship for 4 years.
Okay.
That somebody that wasn't in the faith ideology,
not similar belief systems,
but had come into my picture during that whole phase, and then now I'm transitioning back. So for her, it had to be weird to be like, who's this guy? He's not doing anything, right? And all this and that. So, anyways, after that, I made this commitment. I was like, God, I think I'm ready to settle down. I'm going to wait for you, all this stuff. I made a list, and that's how I came across
Describe your list.
The list.
There are some single people watching.
There was I'm a little embarrassed. I was in a different place at the time.
But you wrote a list of here's what I'm looking for.
Absolutely. I wanted a Latina, light skin, colored eyes, long hair.
You're very specific.
Talent of Alicia Keys. And yes, it was pretty
that would
specific.
also want me.
That would also want, that was funny. And then I came across this gal at the General Assembly, which is in Dallas, Texas, for those that know.
Gathering of all the churches.
Most big churches have General Assembly. They'll do something like that. And I seen her. She crossed all these things.
Checked all the boxes.
Checked all the boxes. And I'm like, what? So I made my move and was ghosted for 1.5 years because of that bold move that I made.
Anyone who knows you knows you're big on bold moves, and
I came in strong. I'm not gonna lie.
I think there's something to be said though for making moves, man, and go for it, and
it paid off because after the 1.5 years ghost, Laura, my wife, of now on May 30th, it'll be 20 years. She called me up thinking that on May 20th, she called me up saying that happy birthday. I just want to call you for your birthday. I'm like, my birthday's not until July. But
my birthday
this
now,
is the first time you called me, so it's my birthday now.
Thank you.
Exactly. So from every day on that point, man, we talked every night. I mean, I remember $600-$700 phone bills because we didn't have the setup we have now.
Right.
And that dating scene was fun and awesome and special. And in August I flew her down here. In December I proposed, and then in May we got married.
Wow.
And a cool story. You might want to confirm this with Laura, but I think she would affirm.
The way you remember it.
I planned most, if not all, of the wedding, and paid for most, if not all, of the wedding because, again, our parents were out of the picture really, and I thought that was pretty special. We had a mariachi.
Good feeling.
Absolutely. I
was
young
good feeling
enough
for a man to provide something for the woman he loves.
Right.
Like that's how. Maybe I'm old fashioned, but I think that's how men are designed. We're providers, we're givers. I mean, just even physiologically, men are givers and women are receivers, just in the purest, rawest physical sense of it, right? And I think that carries on to a lot of areas where men are designed to provide. When, you have a son, and when you see your child for the first time, in most men I've experienced, there's this something comes alive and says, I need to provide. I need to take care of this guy. This is my responsibility. There's just something that comes alive in a man. And so that's cool. That's cool that you had that feeling of, I want to provide something awesome for her, to show her I love her. I can take care of her. I got it.
I think yes. And there's a common theme in regards to like culture and how it's impacted my identity, so to say, because remember, the American culture, oftentimes the fathers of the bride would pay for the wedding, right? And we are going to pay for this, or, the Latino cultures, we have, sponsors, or we have people that are going to help pay in the family, padrinos and things like that. But we didn't have that. And I mentioned that because, yes, there's some pride in me that I was fortunate enough to have worked so hard to be able to provide this, but that it was the exact correlation to what our college experience was. Now, we had parents that loved us and I'm sure wanted the best for us. But to expect any kind of financial assistance or support, or to expect that.
They also had 11 other kids.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, a very special piece to kind of where we're at today and what has worked for us.
Cool. Yeah. So how'd you end up going back to school? So we, fast forward a little bit, we met. You have a son, Christian, great kid. Talk more about him. We met, went to work in education for a year, where I ran the school for a year. And then you went back to UNC. Talk a little bit about how that all.
Prior to us meeting, remember I did the criminal justice thing, right? Mm-hmm. And remember the Ardani went out. Well,
closed, yeah.
They closed. Well, after a year and a half of Ardani, and I was with them from 98 to 2004. So for 6 years, a couple of years, I eventually, at some point, I told them I was taking a class in computer information systems at Ames. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, well, we need help, building desk in our IT department because, our Ardani was flourishing. Uh-huh. Their, outlook was coming. So, I had known great people like Patty, who was very influential in my leadership
Patty
at
Jones,
that time.
My
Patty
sister-in-law,
Jones,
big shout out to Patty.
Phenomenal. Fran was influential in my time at Ardani, and so many others. Brad Jones, influential. But I went from working the printing press, which I became a road tender. I made myself up to a road tender at the printing press. But I went from that because they needed help in IT. Mm-hmm. And some of the things, so I was just building desks, but I wasn't getting dirty anymore. I was like, I understood. So I was in this young enough stage where I was like, I knew I wanted more, and that I didn't have to work as hard.
So going from the production floor to the office environment was like, this is where it's at.
I was still just making desks, but I was around people that were making good money. They were getting salary. They were working for the same company in a whole different level of building, and probably getting more work and a more 8 to 5 kind of vibe. And I'm like, what is this world?
How do I get into this?
Exactly. Yeah. So because I knew Spanish and because I'm a friendly by nature, I had these people that were like, I remember I had this long ponytail, so I'm still in transition. I'm like, who am I? Mm-hmm. But I got embraced and somebody brought me into that world. I had not had a computer at that time and knew little about Outlook or anything. But somebody brought me into that space and said, Elias, would you like to work here permanently? And so I became a help desk specialist and got changed the status at the corporate world. And then I was traveling and I was taking a Microsoft Certified Professional because Ardani was paying for it to get Microsoft Certified Professionals from UNC. So I had this crazy transformation during this time. And I said, this is it. This is happening. And I got some great years of that. And I moved up and I learned IT. I learned servers. I learned all of this weird stuff. Yeah. But my niche was people. I created, so because I was able to resonate with each side from, the bindery department to the press, and I can connect with at all levels. I was pretty decent at that. And so when I held a class that says, hey, let me help you learn Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, I was bringing in people that probably would have never come had they not known who was facilitating it or who had not been on the press room just, once before. But that's when...
Talk a little bit, Elias, about... So it's, as a young person, right? How old were you at this point?
20,
early 20s?
Yeah, early mid.
So you're still trying to... you're trying to make that jump from the production room to the offices, right? Mm-hmm. So you're wanting to be noticed on some level, right? Mm-hmm. But we have very little control over that, really. You're friendly, you're working hard, you're doing everything you can. So are a lot of other people. So how important was it for that dude or that lady who noticed you to see that? Like, think about how life-changing that was for that one person to say, I'm going to give this dude a shot. Like, do you remember who it was?
Yeah, Preston Reed. I would love to give a shout out to Preston Reed, who was a land administrator for land admin administrator. So he was the king of that world. and he saw something in me, which you got to remember, oftentimes in IT, there's not very many MMA fans, and there's not very many people that know what it is like to work at the Pickle Dock in LaSalle and stuff. But for whatever, so there was still that rawness in me, and that's something that I face in every stage of my life, even now as a doctoral student or as a professional in higher ed. There's always that's a part of me.
You're still who you are, man.
That's just part of my story.
But I think you need to bring that. It's disingenuous if you don't. If you try and, I'm a pastor. I love MMA. I practice jujitsu. That's just part of who I am. If I try and hide that, then I'm not really, what's the point of that? I don't want to live in a world where I have to pretend I'm someone else. You know what I mean? Like, so
there was a lot of that. I mean, there was the Tejano music. There was just so many things. MMA, was a part, but yes, it's just this whole, my story and how I had to assimilate or cover it to just advance. And that I've seen throughout higher ed and all of my stages, dealing with imposter. And then it's not until there's a comfort level of like saying, you know what, I have this ability to connect in spaces that others couldn't. And so I hold on to that, and I'm like, I see that as extremely valuable. That's what's allowed me to succeed.
We'll come back. I want to finish your story, but we're going to jump forward for a second, because there's a lot of, you're in higher ed now. You work for Colorado State University, very close to getting your Ph.D. So you'll be Dr. Quiñonez soon. Yes. And so, but there's a lot of young leaders who are listening, who are in that, right? They're like, I don't know how much of myself I really can be, because I'm trying to play this game too, and I want to advance, but I also want to be me. What advice? So look into this camera right here. What advice would you give that guy, the young Elias? Like, what's the balancing act? You get what I'm saying? What would you say to him?
Sure.
To this one right here.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think I have any solid answer, because it's taken
Dude, I just teed you up.
I know. It's taken me 45 years to figure out who and what. And even now I'm still discovering. And I think that's the beauty of kind of our journey, is discovering. But when I think back in my life, and when I think of what the most special, what's the most empowering, what's the most things I'm proud of, I would say that those moments have been when I've been able to give to others and impact others and be purposeful, and recognize that that's going to be a part of a story. That's something that I'm proud of. So I think the sooner that any leader can recognize what are those things that fill their cup, and what are those things that are impacting others, discovering your talent, and I think, which is a part of this journey. I think the sooner that you can discover that, the sooner and the easier it's going to be to advocate for this purposeful life that I think we're all striving for.
Yeah, that's good. Good advice. It's hard. There's a balancing act for sure, because if you go in just saying, this is me, take it or leave it, deal with it or don't. Many people have the option of don't, right? So there's a balancing act between, I don't know, how do you say it better than playing the game and kind of working the system and being true to who you are. But
absolutely,
I have also found the higher you climb on the ladder, the more true to yourself you can be, because you have more influence and authority, and people respect what you've achieved and your expertise and whatever, right?
That's a great point.
That's how a pastor can get tattoos and not get any lip about it, because you get to a certain point where people understand that this is just part of it.
It helps that he started the church.
Yeah, when you start the church, that also helps when you make the rules. Okay, so let's jump to so we went back to school at UNC. We ran high school for a year together. What were you studying at that time?
Man, I mean, there's just so many cool things. Just getting through UNC and why I chose communication, a liberal arts degree that got me through, and how somebody impacted my life in that space, and how I had to take 26 credits my last semester to graduate. But that's when I was working at the Christian bookstore, and while I was, being a coach to my son's soccer team and being married and trying to figure out life. But 26 credits. But
what's full time?
12.
So
yeah, and 18 is it's pretty. It's pretty much where
if you go to an advisor and say, I want to take more than 18. Even 18 is like, I don't know if you should do that because it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to do 26, your advisor had to have been like, you're crazy.
Yeah. And it wasn't until this particular advisor, recognized me and recognized my situation, recognized my story.
Yeah.
And because of that said, look, following this model of advising, this person, meets 5-10 red flags.
Right.
And they had recognized that this person had also overcome many things and that this person is doing it for a purpose. I was married, I have a son, vision, and I need to graduate because I need a job. And they knew that I could, there's a chance that I could do this. So they were willing to just take that risk, and they fed into that. So hope is kind of where I'm, where I see as mentors are out there trying to mentor people. And I've seen it in teachers. There's great, wonderful research in regards to teachers that instill hope and mentors that instill hope, advisors that instill hope in students. Not false hope. There's a difference, but just can instill that.
When you recognize, again, now you're talking about when you see in that young person.
Right.
When you see it, like that guy saw it in you, right? He saw it in, he saw it in you, and he said, there's a lot here, but I see that you could be successful in this area. So he calls it out. And now you're talking about leaders doing the same, right? Your advisor obviously saw it and said,
when I think back at the most influential people in my life that made an impact to a very stubborn, very lost kid at the time, it was those people that see me for who I am now, and the time that I had the long hair, the different color hair, whatever, the lost as can be. And then, so now I'm able to apply that to everything that I do today and where I work with families or where I work with students. So that one, I think it was a very critical learning lesson for me to recognize. And getting back to what I find purposeful, it's that niche and ability to connect with people at whatever level they're at and see the beauty in them, to say, I know what it looks like now, but I also know what this can provide and what skill sets you have.
It's going to be worth it, man.
When they don't have that support.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the most rewarding thing out of any job that I've ever had have been the students and the people that I've been able to influence.
Cool. Okay, so we just took a break, but we're jumped back into it now.
So I am. I think I was talking a little bit about being able to graduate from UNC and how I was the first of 12 to
get a college
degree. And then what I didn't share is I remember calling my dad and saying, Dad, we're going to celebrate graduating. He said, Mijo, I didn't even know you were in college. And they love me, right? My family loves me, but at this point, I think what I'm trying to share, that once Laura and I were doing this it was us on our own, and we had Christian at the time, so it was just us on our own.
Right. And at this time, Laura went back to school also.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. She waited till you were done.
Exactly. So one of the cool things, I talked about the 26 credit hours, where 6 of those hours were an internship that I was provided by Tobias Guzman, who gave me the opportunity. He says, Elias, we need someone to really connect with our community here, and largely Latinos. And I think I was getting a degree in communication. He said, would you be interested, in this opportunity to do the internship first and foremost, but it eventually became a job. So I'm like, what? So I went into, so I did this semester as doing internship work. I was a recruiter, and they assigned me Dayspring and I think Central.
Okay.
And
couple high schools.
High schools, only 1 or 2, but I was like, I got this. And then I was just like, this is where my heart's at, man. I know that I can make a difference here. Went to my supervisor at the time and I said, hey, I'd like to recruit in all of the schools in Greeley. I would love this area. They're like, it's yours. So one of the reasons I bring that up, because when I was offered a position to be an admissions counselor for UNC, I knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I was, and it was to impact the same school and the same community that I'd come from. So, and once I got permission from my supervisor to do this, I reached out to the counselors, and I had some phenomenal counselors at that time that were trusting in me and saying, so when I had asked to be at their schools 2 hours a week, every week, and all the big schools. So this was Northridge, this was Central, this was Greeley West. I was in those schools for 2 hours a week. And again, we just seen the numbers shoot out because the Greeley Promise was there. So I knew the ropes of what it was to be admitted now. And I was like, hey, 3.1 GPA, 19 ACT score, you're automatically in. You get a $2,000 renewable scholarship. I mean,
something our community put together.
You're right.
For
advocated for yes.
Our district schools. Yeah.
Yes.
Incredible.
We see numbers just shoot out the roof. And I was getting a lot of credit, and just the impact. So year after year, I was building this relationship with the counselors. They were allowing me in these schools. I was able to connect with students and families. And man, I remember my final year in 2012, where Greeley West, we had 101 students admitted into UNC. Central was 91, and then Northridge, which was pretty new at the time, was 56.
Wow.
I don't know if they've ever seen numbers that strong since then, and it was largely due to just that model, right? But what I discovered later on was that I was creating harm in regards to good intentions, because something that we were also proud of, we were recognizing, and they were all getting, scholarships. We were living true. They were getting admitted, they were getting registered, but access without full support, and the support at that time was like, what are we doing for these students who are first gen, who are going to be full Pell? And we have CHE, UNC has CHE, and they've been doing some phenomenal things with first generation, but you got to remember, this was at the masses, and we grew so large and so fast that it created a problem. So what we started experiencing what I experienced my first year. I got in, they laid me in, but no one was following me through and asking what happened after that. And that created some harm, because that created a lot of the same stories that happened to me where they got their scholarships. Many got surplus, but they weren't going to class, or they didn't understand that they didn't prioritize, or they were trying to work full time. All of these things.
Live at home, try and take care of their siblings, and go to college.
But as an admissions counselor, I was rocking it, man. I was promoted. I was now recruited.
We're getting them in the door.
New Mexico, Arizona. To be honest, where Latinos were a strong community, I was going to those regions. In California, eventually went to Hawaii, which is something that only our senior counselors or supervisors or directors go to. And I somehow made it in my final year to get out there and recruit. And I was just doing what I knew I felt the Lord gifted me with, and that was to be relatable, meet people where they're at, tell a story that I believe in, and allow them to decide, is this guy real? Is he fake? What is he trying to sell? And the numbers showed. So I did that, and then I recognized that, man, they're paying for my school. They would pay if I went to school. They would pay for it, and they paid for Lauda. They had 100% dependent tuition grant. That was unheard of.
It's not that way anymore.
Right. Yeah. So I got my master's. I'm like, because again, as a Latino, and again, we're in this world, and coming from poverty, and tuition is only going up, right? Only going up. And as you go into advanced degrees, the credit, the cost of a credit hour continues to increase. So we're trying to figure out how do we almost kind of work the system to help pay for our education. I mean, it's not a cheesy thing. It's not a wrong thing. It's just really taking advantage of the resources that you have accessible to you to benefit you. And I learned that skill from this experience. So I got my master's. I got a master's in educational leadership and 30 credits, and bam. I remember after graduating, I was like, if I'm going to pursue my master's, Lauda and I went to, we took Christian too. We got an opportunity to go to Barcelona, Spain. Dr. Andres, props, and thank you for that opportunity. We got to go to Barcelona, Spain, spend 3 weeks out there through a study abroad. And those were my first 3 credits to grad school. And that was Lauda's first 3 credits to undergrad. And here we are with a 5-year-old son and 12 other, students that were all, grad students, or, they're all single for sure. And here I am with my family, having this experience that was pretty special.
That is cool. Yeah.
So then I got my master's paid for. And Lauda, who's always wanted to be a teacher, who's been always, from day one, that was her thing. And I'm saying this because I know she's comfortable in this space, So she was born in Mexico, in Tamaulipas, and received a permanent residency shortly after that, after moving into Mission McAllen. And then it wasn't until we were married for, I would say, I forget what exact year, but it wasn't until years after we were married that she got her residency. But we knew that
her citizenship.
Her citizenship. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. But even as an admissions counselor, there was having a permanent residency. Can they go to college? Can they take advantage of? We were lost. And here I was an admissions counselor. I'll never forget this experience. We were excited because we're like, you can get your school paid for, and this is going to happen. And well, we went to an admit day, and my supervisor at the time, didn't deny her, but said that, she's going to be required to pay out of state tuition
because she's not a citizen yet.
So that would take,
it's what, maybe that would triple the
exactly,
tuition? Yeah.
At least. So I'm like, man, it was a big blow to us because that wasn't going to be covered really, and it was a different thing. So, anyways, Trish Escobar, who is the director of the Cesar Chavez Cultural Center, again, a part of the resources that allowed me to build community at UNC and make it through. And Eric Reneker, of course, but Trish said, Elias, that's not right. Because she has a permanent residency, she can get in-state tuition. So this was my first time really challenging that kind of authority and calling somebody who's my boss to say that was wrong.
Oh.
And what that did to us, man, it already deflated us, deflated out at the time.
I remember when that happened. Yeah.
And then it came out true that they were wrong. Mm-hmm. And Laura was admitted, and she was admitted at in-state, and she was going to get her tuition covered. And so it was on now. It was on, and she's living her best life, right? And
she's now a teacher in Fort Collins kindergarten.
Yeah, she's got 8 years in teaching now, and she teaches at Harris Elementary, and she's a phenomenal teacher.
She's about to.
She's going to walk in spring with a master's in literacy.
Come on.
So I couldn't be more proud of her and our story. But I think if we were to put our story in a nutshell, a lot of it was the Forrest Gump kind of a concept of you lean against me and I lean against you, because we're the only ones that understood glimpses of who we were.
Right. Yeah.
And the only ones that understood, why are you doing this? Why are you sacrificing so much? Why are you? And it was always for our community. Mm-hmm. And till this day, that continues to be our grounding and our compass is our community.
So now we'll fast forward a little bit, you're a Ph.D. candidate.
Right.
Have your Ph.D. maybe by the end of the year?
Yeah. So in that time, in 2017, my parents, both of my parents passed away in a car accident. So Pat and my dad, they were in their older years. My dad was going to turn 80, and so in 2017 they had passed away. And throughout all this time, where my dad has seen me have good jobs, or what he says good jobs, but he just never really understood what I did. He never. And sometimes it can be hard to understand what people are doing in higher ed, because very few have
right.
lived that.
You almost have to be in higher ed
right.
to really understand how the whole machine works. Yeah.
But I think what my father did understand was, like, he knew why I was in the ministry and why I was doing what I was doing for the youth ministry at the time. And it was the same drive. It was the same motivation, same thing with, with the New Hope, why we were doing what we were doing. Yeah. And I just transferred some of that to education, and we can go into, I'll just throw a snippet at this. But one of the things that I struggled at the time, when we were again reaching the small church community, which it wasn't Mosaic, and here we were, creating these experiences and creating these fundraisers and creating these discipline classes, that our families were still dealing with dysfunction. So it had to go beyond faith for me. There was something that we were missing, because our students and our kids were still dealing with, funky issues and, criminal justice and systems and getting in the systems and getting,
Yeah, it's systemic.
Right. Yeah. So I knew there had to be something else. And that's where, and I knew it wasn't just money. I felt that education was this opportunity. Now, if you can, combine education with our faith, I felt this could be the answer. And that's where I chose to go all in and focus pretty much since. That's been my driving force.
So your PhD will be in
higher ed leadership. And my master's is in educational leadership with an emphasis in higher ed and student affairs. And the reason I mentioned my parents and them passing away in 2017 was that it was a year after that I got admitted into a program that at the time had 100 applicants and only 15 got in. 2 were from Colorado. And within those 2, I was the only Latino that was there. Not one was from CSU. So I was admitted into a program that most would consider to be at the time, again, a very tough one to get into.
Competitive, yeah.
And and that was a very big highlight for me. And many were happy for me, but they also didn't understand.
Right, yeah. I thought you already graduated from college.
Right?
Yeah.
Why?
That's what I got when I got my master's. Hey, you want to come to my graduate? I thought you already did that. Well, I did, but this is a little different. Okay. Is there going to be a cake?
Right. And it's fun to celebrate these big moments. And I remember being able to do that, right? Where we celebrated, we reserved the Chop House. I invited a handful of friends and, to celebrate the admission. But what was quickly lost was the fact that I have the next 5 years to do 2 doctoral level classes every semester from that time since.
Yeah.
While being a professional in higher ed, advocating for some pretty serious issues that were going on, while being a parent, while being a spouse, while trying to just figure life and finance, everything, and still do the work, still be at that level.
So when I finished my bachelor's degree, I did it all backwards and upside down. So I went from Ames Community College and taking classes at that level of rigor in academics to the master's program at UNC in one semester. And it's a long story. But anyway, I remember my first day of grad school, we're reviewing the syllabus, and the professor asked, "Are there any questions?" And someone raised their hand and they said, "It says here that we're supposed to read from page 1 to page 168 by next week." And the textbook was like a Bible. I mean, it looked like a dictionary, just as you know, right?
Right.
There's no pictures, there's no graphs, there's no fun little Q&As.
No videos.
No videos. It's just dense text. And it was a big textbook. And the professor said, "No, that's correct." And right there, I thought, what have I gotten myself into? I don't know if I have what it takes to do this, right? So that was the jump. And it was a weird jump I made because I should have had a middle step and I did it all backwards. What was a jump like from, say, bachelor's level or even master's to PhD coursework? What's that jump like?
So time and time again, this imposter syndrome was very real from undergraduate to master's, except
describe what you mean by that. Imposter syndrome.
Sure. So
people that are listening.
Imposter syndrome is used or defined in education oftentimes as when we already feel inadequate of being there. We feel like we don't belong there. We look around and we don't see people that maybe...
Everybody's different than me.
Exactly. The language looks different.
These people are all smarter than me. Yeah.
Exactly. Nothing feels normal to us. It's kind of like a cultural shock. And oftentimes people experience that alone. And especially when we have marginalized identities who aren't comfortable sharing, already not comfortable talking about what they are experiencing because we're pretty independent. We've oftentimes are independent. That's down almost to a flaw, right? Because we're not talking about how scary it is to be in these classes. We're not talking about how dumb we may feel, and that's probably not
especially
the best
when
term.
You don't see anybody that looks like you or you don't feel like they've had your same life experience teaching or in leadership.
Sure.
Then you feel even more like, well, these other students look like the teacher. Therefore, there's a connection. I don't look like the teacher. So I feel that much more marginalized and imposter. Yeah. Okay.
And
so you felt that way.
Are comfortable even asking questions, confident meeting with an advisor or professor, utilizing those resources. These were things that oftentimes first gen aren't taught to do.
Right.
And so we're
here to keep our heads down and stay out of trouble. Yeah.
So every semester, every class is the same experience of like just figuring it out. So that's what, and at the PhD level, we got to think about the diversity in each of these spaces. It gets less and less. We already have a challenge with diversity in undergraduate, right? And now we're talking about masters, well, even few. And now we're talking a PhD. Man, I'll tell you the big moment that came to me was when every year our program brings all of the cohorts together. We're a cohort model. And my cohort, man, they're coming from very prestigious schools, very affluent schools, universities that my other colleagues are in. Great, wonderful people, phenomenal people that have been a great support and encouragement. But so we get all of the people that have been admitted into a room, and this time frame, they were asking about, well, who's been to community college? I was one of the few. There was only a few in this room of however many people that had ever even experienced community college.
Interesting.
We had people doing research in that, but
one of them said, "Well, I went there to teach one semester," but you're like, "No, I was a student."
So if we were to ask, well, who's been Pell eligible? Who has been on limited income? Who's been on welfare? Who's been all of these things? Oftentimes, I think it would have been just me standing up.
Whoever got free lunch.
Right. So to compare that to somebody who may have had a different experience, and you're not competing, but you're in the same space.
You're in a competitive environment for
sure. And we're
yeah.
trying to be at the same spot here. It was scary. And those are moments like, and now I'm, it just, those are things that we have to get better at. One, talking about, two, addressing, and if there's positions for us to change a system, at least encouraging systems to recognize some of that and creating support systems for that. But now I am that support system for others. And I want to develop others. Yeah. That.
So the long-term goal of the PhD is what?
So higher ed leadership, I discovered a while back when I was like, what? They're paying me to travel. They're paying the per diems and I'm doing this. And then, and I'm seeing the outcomes. I'm seeing that students that wouldn't have been here. I remember students from stories from Hawaii that were here largely because of this recruitment style and tactic.
Yeah.
I've seen that with many different states, but I see it now. I have students that are working at CSU now and students that are just some maybe even surpassed me at this point, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
because
the goal.
Of just the support. And it wasn't because I was the one that got them there, but I did provide some support. And I was like that one other person that said, I believe this. I've seen it. You can and you will. So that has been that's just what keeps me going.
Cool, man. So I'm going to give you a couple more questions. If you could talk to 18-year-old Elias, now that you're 45?
45, yeah.
45.
46.
46. Professional. Beautiful family. PhD candidate. Wife's about to get her master's. Not that those are markers. Those aren't the goal, right? They're kind of mile markers on the way of really the person you're becoming. It's evidence that you're not a quitter. It's evidence that you know how to learn, that you know how to find the answer, right? So much of what we learn in college you don't ever use. But that's not the point. The point is you're going to prove that you're not a quitter, that you can stick with something, that you know how to find the answer, all that, right? So knowing what you know now, talking to 18-year-old Elias, and he somehow found you, and he says, what advice would you give that guy? Because 18-year-old Elias is listening to this right now.
Thank you for that. And the irony of this is that I have a 19-year-old son that his name is Elias, so he is the me. And when I think about what I want for him and what I would tell him who is me, it would be
he's about as genetically identical to you as a son can be to his father.
As he's almost 6 foot. And,
except for that part.
He's starting CSU, which, again, I would love to reiterate. He's going into graphic design, and this was our goal. This is why Laura and I sacrificed so much. So a true shout out to my wife and to my son for getting where they're at and doing it for the right reasons. But so to my son who is 19 and and whereas where I was at, learning a world that's different than where I was, but yet a same lost feeling, an imposter feeling, and so forth. In a sense, is to love yourself and show a little bit of grace to yourself, and just give yourself a time to discover what it is that you're good at, what it is that you're passionate about, but to love God and love people for sure. And these are things that I knew in me that I had, but it wasn't something that I always prioritized. And those, when I look back now at 46, and when I think about my journey, good, bad, up, down, sideways, the things that made me feel great were when I advocated for others. And so I would like to have affirmed that to me at that stage, is continue advocating, continue fighting for what you believe in, and recognizing that when you choose this road, it's not a bed of roses, and that it's going to be a fight.
Yeah.
So I would have liked to maybe prepare myself to say it's going to be tough. The reason why you don't see others up there is because they don't make it, or because it's challenging, because the systems are broken, because people are broken. A lot of stuff.
That's good, man. I've never heard anybody say it that way. The reason you don't see other people represented in those spaces is because for some reason the guy in front of you quit. It got too hard, or he said it's not worth it. Screw this, whatever. It's an interesting statement.
We're seeing it now.
Good observation.
In higher ed and education, we're seeing it in teachers, especially teachers with minoritized identities. It's tough. It is tough. But when we think about the work that we're doing in the Y and the communities out there that need people like us to fill in the gaps for of the parents that may or may not be able to support, but are willing to just meet with them at a time where, somebody that knows financial aid or whatever it may be, that's what I want to continue to encourage. And I believe that's what we've been able to produce, both Laura and I, and now Christian. And I believe I do a pretty good job of surrounding myself with others who advocate for the same thing, which have allowed me to...
Like attracts like, for sure, yeah. Right. Lions attract lions.
To be inspired by other people's work.
Cool. All right, 2 more questions. I want to throw one other thing out real quick. Hanging on this wall right here next to us is a painting, and I went to an art gallery in, I don't remember where, some state, and I saw a painting that was similar to this, and I loved it. And I was like, man, that would look so cool in my house, in my office. And it was like $8,000. So there were 8,000 reasons why I didn't buy it. And I said, I know my boy can paint.
Wish you'd have told me about the $8,000 earlier, though. I mean, that would have been nice.
I didn't want to ruin the creative process. Didn't want to spoil a good thing. But this is something that, this is not the average guy that can take a paintbrush. I'll put a couple pictures too of some of the other artwork you've done, because it's incredible. Talk about that outlet, like, because that's so different than everything else you do, right? This creative piece of, talk a little bit about why you do that, because I think every leader needs to have a creative something else besides your work, right? Otherwise, it consumes you.
Right.
So talk a little bit about why you do that and that hobby.
Right. My family, there's many of us in our family that have actually been pretty gifted in the art or things like that. Creativity is one of those things, whether it be music, whether it be drawing and stuff. And I actually discovered the oil painting. I'm not the best oil painter or painter at all. I'm not the best artist, or not even close. I'm amateur at best. But
there's that imposter syndrome again.
No, that's a true story. But it's one of the reasons why I value these paintings that I've been fortunate enough to do to some close friends, and because there's so many flaws and there's so many inadequacies and there's so many. If you look at it closer, it shows it's a human touch, a human hand, and but the time that it takes, and the why, and the fact that it's almost my best.
Yes,
that's what makes
it's an incredible gift to give someone your time.
Right. And I know that it's not replicated. Nobody can replicate that what some would see a mess, what others people would see like, a great piece. The color, it just can't. It's a unique piece. That's the original. So I discovered that when my parents passed away in 2017, it was the first time I ever dabbled in oil paintings, and I did a lion that I have up in my house. It's a simple white portrait, black and white portrait of a lion that is all scarred up. He's got a huge mane. He's looked like he's had a tough run and
been in some fights. Yeah,
he's been into a couple of things, but the confidence in the eyes and how he seems to be overlooking, whether it be the pride or whether it be the land or kind of the protector, or whether he's recognizing the journey that's ahead, that it's going to be more fights, but that he's endured some fights.
Yeah. That's
what you see in those paintings. And that's what's therapeutic for me when I see something that's inspiring and I'm able to replicate it.
You were telling your story at that point through this painting, because that's you. I mean, you've been through some scraps, very significant loss, losing your parents on the same day, which was awful. So this is you. That's interesting.
Right.
I never knew that part of it.
And that's why I value the opportunities to do things like that, is because that is me, good and bad and ugly and indifferent. It's me. And it's great. It's awesome when you have somebody that at least acknowledges that.
Right.
He's no Picasso, but it's mine. It's your piece. And I spent hours and hours and hours for that.
I love it, man. It's my favorite piece of artwork. So love it. All right. No, 2 more questions. Where have you seen God in all of it?
All of it. I've seen it in all of it. Now, despite my journey, or despite where I was, or despite what the measurements of other people of when others want to define where God is in other people's lives, because we're good at that, right?
Yeah. There's a little Pharisee living inside every one of us.
God has absolutely been a part of every journey, the loss, the wilderness, every bit, and even the prideful, the narcissist, all of that. He has been a part of that. Now, I 2 things that resonate with me along those lines are peace and love, and I try to recognize this in others as well, like my friends, peace and love. I believe there's a scripture that says, hey, my people will be known for 2 things, peace and love. I'm known for 2 things, peace and love. I want that to be the ambiance that I provide in most rooms. And I'm pretty humorous, and that's great. But I try to be humble, but whenever there's a space where if people are not experiencing peace and love around me or whatever, if I'm not exuding that, if my home is not exuding that, but I can only correlate that to God, and God's, in us and me. And the reason where I'm at is that, but my home, what's allowed me to be successful and to fight these fights and, go through a battle and then come back, is I have environments that are filled with peace and love, and I have friends that are peace and love and that are warriors, both he and she's. They're warriors, and also fighting the same fight. So we get together, we heal our wounds, and we recognize the why, what our purpose is. But it boils back down to, now bringing that all back to the paintings. I did a special painting for my son when he graduated, but it didn't get finished until
you're a busy man.
He was a busy man.
Give you a lot of hard times about that.
There was I was at a retreat one time, a conference, and there was a speaker. We've all been inspired by speakers or people that are like, man, that was pretty powerful. I asked them a question that I wish others would ask more often, or people would ask. And it's like, what books can I have that you learn from, that were inspiring to you, right? And he introduced me to a book called A Tale of 3 Kings at the time, and I later on produced some workshops for a youth conference around it. And it was just
very powerful book. Yeah.
Very powerful book to me. So when my son is transitioning. It's a story
of Saul, David, and Absalom, right? In the Bible. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a small book too. It's not very thick. It's a pretty easy read.
Right. Yeah. Might be a little tough to get your hands on it, but yes.
Yeah. Good leadership lessons for sure.
And it resonated with me and hit close to home for me. So when the message to my son, right, it's that space. It's saying, son, we're going to be David, right? David's is probably the story that's resonated with us most, where he learned his most special gifts in the pastures and, to sling the slingshot, to play music, to worship in those quiet moments, in those down times. And, so he He was anointed early on. Things that, despite whatever life threw at him, he was like, "Well, this is what a king's supposed to be like." I've had those moments, right? And the reason I'm able to fight the Goliaths, what I feel from my perceived notion, is because of these moments of past the things I've been overcome. But there's also times where I feel, and this is my ideology in space, where I feel my reign is up in this space. And then I transition it to somebody else, where I'm going to be passing that down to other leadership, because other leadership can take it to places where I'm not. So as opposed to fighting that and thinking that that's just where I got to stay and do, I've been relieved of that. And so this painting with my son and I is a painting of three crowns. They represent my father, they represent me, and they represent my son. And my father, the most humble man and my king, really, was that to me. He taught me, he's prepared me to be where I'm at today in the most humble way. And I'm seeing that in my son now, and I'm seeing it in myself. And so it reminds us of those things. Man. It reminds us
I didn't know that that's what the symbolism behind the crowns was. That is cool. I love that. All right. Last question. That word successful is so loaded, right? Everyone wants to be successful, but it means something different to everybody. So what does that word mean to you, successful? And are you successful?
There's a recent accolade. I want to give a shout out to Ben as well. He's been doing a phenomenal job. And
good job, Ben.
Yeah, we wouldn't be where we're at.
Behind the cameras.
The man behind the cameras. And he's got the book in front of him. Can we show that? Is that legal?
I'll post it in. Yeah.
Okay.
I can
that'd
post
be
it
nice.
in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what it is to be successful. Now, I've mentioned the Semilla Project. Now, when I think of success and when I think about all of the things that I've been, fortunate enough to be a part of, just recently, and I'm talking last June, I got awarded a 5-year grant from CSU Systems, which oversees CSU Pueblo, CSU Spur, and CSU campus, their main campus. So faculty and staff, administrators got the opportunity to put in some grants. We have 3 campuses in the Denver area that are for educational purposes of the community in regards to ag sciences and natural sciences and things. Beautiful buildings. If you haven't visited, please visit. But on a whim, I envisioned something, and I'd seen something, and I said, "Shoot, can I do this?" So I was invited to put in for the grant, and I proposed something. I reached out to 2 of my very special friends. I want to give a quick shout out to Christina Ingram, the director of Colorado Gear Up, and oversees a program that serves over 5,000 students through that program, often first gen, limited income. And my other good friend, Ty Smith, who's the director of the Native American Culture Center.
Big shout out to those guys.
Big shout out to them. I says, here's what I envision. Can we serve your students and get them through Spur and do this for 5 years? Propose a budget that would not only provide the very basics to provide this, but to provide a very almost lavish experience, just a great experience for them.
Great support experience.
I wanted them to have.
So this is for first gen students?
Yeah.
To go to the CSU Spur campus?
Yes.
Wow.
And I felt I wanted a budget that provided what some would consider a first class experience, right? To students and school systems that may not often get that. Now, I worked with Colorado Department of Higher Education, with Colorado Gear Up, and I knew the students that we served through that. And I wanted them to be this student. So Christina was like, Elias, if you're leading it, we're on board. And Ty is like, Elias, I am connected with 2 programs in there that are both Native American education programs in JeffCo and DPS. And let me talk to them. He comes back, he says, Elias, they're in. Christina is in. I am going to be serving, this program, the Semilla Project, which, there's so much.
Semilla means seed.
Seed,
Spanish,
yes.
Yeah.
And the start of this proposal was that society grows great when old men plant seeds in whom shade they'll never sit under. And that's a beautiful thing. And and the whole point of the Semilla Project was this emphasis of the seed is perfect in creation, right? if you can provide the environment for it, it will fulfill its purpose. And so many of us, our environments, and I'm just trying to prove how our environments are a factor of who we are. And when others want to be critical of the outcome of a seed, they're oftentimes not evaluating the environment. That's my story. That's my wife's story. That's Christian's story. That's our story.
Cool.
And we know that when we can have an influence on the environment, invest in that, and provide the very best we can for people, that seeds are perfect in nature, in my opinion, that they produce what they're intended to. And that's where the big oaks, that's where the California, the red trees are.
Redwoods, yeah.
The redwoods, and that's
so
where.
How much did you get in the grant? How much money? What was the total proposal?
The 5-year investment was approximately $750,000.
Wow.
For that. So I will be hosting 17 high school visits this spring. We'll be providing, charter buses and we'll be using a catering system to serve these students.
Cool.
So each school will send groups of 50 students. And 250 of these students will be primarily from Native American programs.
Wow, that's cool.
So I'm honored. And when I think of success, and it's not about the money, it's not about me, I do want it to highlight the people that I work with, because again, it's because of Christine Ingram, it's because of Ty, that I could never reach those communities without them.
Right. But, and you're right, you're 100% right. But they wouldn't have reached them either without you.
Right.
Without the idea that you had. So we need each other. Right. It's this whole, we depend on each other. We have this symbiotic relationship with each other that if I don't have you and you don't have me, we're not going to ever be all that we're supposed to become. That's interesting. I
forgot to say this earlier, but the disclaimer is that the views of are mine and maybe not that of CSU or that of the College of Ag, which I work and represent.
CSU has a new president.
Yes.
What's her name?
Parsons, President Parsons.
President Parsons, we appreciate you, but these are Elias's views.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity of CSU to have believed in it, to seen something in that wasn't maybe the most prettiest in nature, maybe it wasn't the most scholarly, but there was a lot of great research in there, of course, but there was a lot of factors that would need to come to play. It was a big investment. In fact, I would say that a lot of people wanted to have access to receive fundings and had great ideas, and not everyone received that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all to say, I'm grateful for the opportunity and the people that see the same thing. Now I'm working with the college and the college department. So we have the interest from all of our departments to say we have an hour that I've allotted for a workshop to entice our students to recognize how special of an opportunity it is to have them. So after experiencing a phenomenal tour of our Spur campuses and what it is that they can be, they're going to have a one-on-one, hands-on, engaging opportunity that they're going to be able to say, I've never seen myself to be able to do this. I never recognized how important, hydroponics or, sustainable, food production or all of these things that matter. We're going to do our very best to take full advantage of this opportunity. And in the presentation that I give, I call it being entrusted. These are the groups that we've been entrusted in. And every student, we're going to serve 1,000 students every year. And every student will have a shirt that in the back, it'll say, Yo soy la semilla. And we have I am the seed, to tell a message to the world. Anybody that's walking behind them is going to read them and can read that and ask them, what does that mean? It's the truth. It is the truth.
That's good.
And when they recognize that their environment impacts the seed, influences the seed, I think we'll start treating things differently.
Come on.
I think we'll start seeing things differently.
So, think about, you probably have not put this together, but as I'm sitting here seeing it, there was this 18-year-old kid who went to UNC who didn't have the support he needed. And maybe there was some support there that you just didn't even know about, right? So you go and withdraw 15 credits and that was it. That same kid is now going to be bringing in 1,000 kids to a college environment with all of the support that they need and more. Right? That's incredible, man. Like I don't know if you put that together, and I'm sure you do. I certainly do. I see it. Like there's this idea of nobody's doing it. Somebody should be doing something. I'll do it. If nobody else is doing it, I'll do it. That's cool.
And yes, I'm definitely advocating for those things. And I recognize how critical it is for all seeds to have that kind of an environment, and knowing and recognizing that what happens when we have when we invest in that environment.
That's cool.
So
man.
it's
awesome.
And it was true for me.
So to answer the question, are you successful?
I am successful because of the home that I've created, the family that I've created, the friends that I have around me, the people that I've influenced, the communities that I sleep good at night knowing that my work and the intentions have always been good.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that makes me successful.
Cool. Good. Awesome, man. With that, we will call it. Thank you, Elias, for being here. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.